Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett Power, your host. Good to be with you here in April. I can't believe I'm saying April 2021. That is crazy to me. Anyway, welcome to the show. It's the point of Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing amazing and creative work in the world that we can learn from to get better at what we do. That's the whole point of the show. It is interactive, so get on the computer. You can type your questions or your comments or what have you in LinkedIn on the LinkedIn Live page. You can do it on the Facebook page. You can do it on Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, and probably something else I'm forgetting. But we monitor those feeds during the program. So ask your questions so that our guests can answer those for you. Today's going to be, I think, fascinating because, I work as co-founder of Courageous Leadership. We do a lot of leadership development, a lot of leadership training, and a lot of culture change and a lot of change work. And so Michelle Natalya Moore is somebody I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. So it's a pleasure to have her on the program today. She is a seasoned Big Four consultant, and she has been around the world. We were just talking about Moscow, and we were talking about some of our shared experiences and places like that. So she's very experienced around the world. She's an organizational focus builder, body wisdom teacher, and founder of MindEquity. And she is also teaching at MIT social presencing on that team as well. And I got to dig into that. I want to know what that's about. So Michelle, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Rhett.
Well, it's a real pleasure. And what is kind of define your work, because you work a lot in focus and working in getting teams to work and design a strategy that supercharges their work. That's fascinating to me. So talk about that a little bit. Tell me about it.
Sure. So my work is around attention management, really is the simplest way to put it. And why attention management, right? For high innovation with well-being, or you might say in these times, we need attention in order to sustain value creation without that sacrifice of well-being. So that is it in a nutshell. I mean, the details of it are around, if we were to value our attention as much as Facebook does, imagine how much faster we could solve the world's problems. That is sort of my tenet. If we all pretended or not pretended, if we all acted like attention was our most valuable asset, more valuable than money, then we would innovate faster and we would be able to work better, and I believe work better in half the time.
I mean, we all know that the world's, we live in this distracted world, right? I mean, you go to a restaurant, people are on their phones, they're looking at their email or their text messages. I mean, we're just full. I mean, I have the worst case of ADD in the world. So this is doubly bad for me, people like me. But how do you, what are the 5 elements that are impacting attention? What's really causing all distraction and impacting our ability to focus?
So I'm going to answer that question mostly in the context of the workplace. In the workplace, based on my experience myself, being a multitasker, addicted to adrenaline, addicted to changing environments all the time, I noticed that in the last 10 years, in this rise of the smartphone, that in the workplace, there are 5 things impacting my attention. And number 1 is my ability to focus, and focus being a skill. Number 2 is the culture of the team that I'm in or the organization that I'm working with at the moment. Okay. That those behaviors, those norms, those unwritten rules, the whole culture of the organization impacts how we attend to our work. Number 3, and I think this is the big one and the most mysterious one, is body wisdom. The degree to which we are balancing our being present in our own bodies versus just being stuck in a screen or stuck in our heads, and this balance between wisdom and intelligence. So we are so rewarded. I know that in my life, I've been rewarded mostly for intelligence and analytic thought, coming from PricewaterhouseCoopers and that big Four world. I was never rewarded for sensing into the collective intelligence of the team, for example. So I won't go down a rabbit hole now on body wisdom, but and there's then the classic mind-body balance issue, right? If we don't have body-mind balance, we're also going to be burned out and overwhelmed faster, especially now that we're in a pandemic, still in a pandemic, unfortunately, and really with our heads in our screens. Number 4 is, of course, the obvious one, technology, tools. That impacts us. That I don't think needs explanation. We all know that we are bombarded with notifications and we have task switching at large because of that. And then finally, the environment. What is the design of our physical work environment? Is it designed to harness attention? And what about our virtual environment? And the virtual environment is more complex because how do we foster interconnectedness in that virtual environment? Do we have facilitators that are making sure everyone has psychological safety, for example? That's also part of virtual environment design. So those are, all of those things impact how we are able to pay attention.
Why don't we as organizations pay attention to, I think what you said is fascinating when you opened up. Why don't we think about focus and attention as being a valuable asset? Why do we miss that?
You know, this is what I'm curious about. This is why I find this topic and this area so fascinating, because I do not know the answer to this question. I can only speak from experience. And, you know, reflecting, especially on the last 10 years, me included, I have been enamored with new technology. And I have always worked at the intersection of technology-driven change. And from that experience, even back, you know, in the 80s, when I started doing that work, SAP implementations and stuff like that, in all of tech-driven change, the emphasis was on the technology. It's easier to understand tech than it is to understand human behavior. And I believe that there's something still true about that in today's world with even being on Zoom versus, you know, sometimes we could make the choice to do a telephone call instead of a Zoom call with someone we know well. But I know many of us are 8 hours on Zoom a day these days, right? Yeah. And why is that? Somehow it's easier to default to the machine.
That is so true. I had never thought about it in that way, but that is so true. Okay, that's really fascinating. So,
you know, the other piece of that, sort of on that question, is I feel like there's an over-reliance on data. You have to think less, and you don't have to tap into wisdom if you don't choose to, if you have reams and reams of data. And people accept that, oh, well, that research paper says this, that statistic says this, therefore, let's make our decision based on this data. We're not often asking, are we being inclusive on diverse mindsets? We're not digging into, well, where really did that data come from? And we're not tapping into collective wisdom of the team.
Amen. I mean, that gets me down a whole nother rabbit hole. Sorry for my ADD, but I mean, that makes me start thinking about how AI and how that's going to really change. Anyway, that's not an area we were meant to go down today, but wow, that's a big question.
Right, so it's relevant because
relevant.
You know what I worry about? I worry about two things. I believe humanity has two existential threats. One existential threat is climate change, for sure. And the other existential threat is that machines will become our masters. And we are on the road of not being the masters of our tools. And so that is another impetus for this purpose-driven work. I just believe it's critical for humanity to get some balance.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I was having a conversation, and I won't say with who, but I want to call him out. But about using AI, and I'm a executive coach, and so the idea is that AI can do a lot of what we do, and that worries me that we think that it's ever going to replace that one-on-one interaction, right? Because all it's going to do is calculate. It's going to use data to calculate a response, or to give a suggestion, or to give guidance or feedback. And it misses. There's so much to miss in that. We're never going to program that. I mean, that conversation really those kind of conversations really worry me, because I don't think that it's just about data. I mean, data will get it right a lot of the time, but it's not the same. And it's anyway. So talk about distraction holding back professional service teams and how we can fix that.
Sure. Big question. Distraction is holding back any knowledge worker team. And I know professional service is the best, because that's what I've been in my whole life. And right. I think so I believe there are 7 main mistakes that we are making as professional services teams. We are still thinking that we can multitask, including me. I still have this problem. I have to force myself to reduce the number of tabs, to unplug one monitor, to put my phone in another room. But one of the big mistakes is that leaders are not naming that, first of all, multitasking doesn't exist. The brain can't do it. And number 2, what exists is task switching. And leaders are not naming, hey, I have a task switching problem. We all have task switching problems. So what can we do to reduce that? So it's not even being named as an issue. It's just kind of there. And still, I feel like we're rewarded for it. We are rewarded for busyness. Another mistake, we already talked about it, is not having an organizational or a corporate value that says, hey, we value attention for multiple reasons. We value attention because it helps us maintain well-being, and we value attention because it helps us innovate or solve the world's problems better. Another one is that there seems to be an unwritten rule that we prioritize reactive tasks.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, let's be intentional for a couple of hours about what we're doing. Let's turn off notifications and do some focused work, especially if we're creating a deliverable or we're truly innovating. And what goes hand in hand with that is the other mistake that we don't know. Most of us don't know how much focused deep work, and I quote Cal Newport here, right? How much focused deep work time do we actually need to do per week based on our role, based on how we are defining in our teams, in our company, and for ourselves, what the heck is value creation? How am I creating value? What are those assets that require deep work or undistracted focused work time for me to really produce a good output that's going to have some social impact or great market advantage or whatever we're trying to achieve without the sacrifice of well-being, right? So what we see still growth mindset dominates everything. I'm a believer now in donut economics, and that we don't just need growth for growth's sake. So growth still dominates this striving towards growth at all cost. So I believe that we can have what I'm going to say is sustained value creation. Instead of growth, I'm using the term sustained value creation or social impact, depending on what my company's mission is, without the sacrifice of well-being, without being on the verge of burnout.
What you said is really interesting to me, and it seems like one of the ways to solve that problem, though, is to restructure everybody's work, right? To say, from this time you're gonna, from this time to this time you're gonna do this, and this time to this time you're gonna do that. Is that the answer? Or how do you, when you're doing the work that you do, how do you help people restructure that work, or is that part of it?
So again, I have shifted a lot in the last 10 years from the Big Four world, I would say, because I was introduced to more holistic systems change at MIT at the Presence Institute through something called Theory U. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Theory U, but Theory U, when I discovered it, I literally cried because I thought, wow, this is a management consulting framework or a systems change framework that embeds reflective practice and embodiment work into the change work. And so I don't use the word restructuring anymore. I think that's too big. It's too scary. No one wants to restructure. I get scared when I hear that word myself, right? Yeah. I believe strongly in self-management, in organizations who are able to have open collaborative dialogue about change. And I think it begins at the job role level. I don't think you can restructure an organization in a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. So the step-by-step approach that I start with a team is having them do this value creation portfolio exercise. And it could be as simple as drawing a circle on a piece of paper, and then below the circle, writing down the top 4 to 5, maximum 6 activities that took up your time last week. So writing maximum 6 down, and then allocating that current state in the pie chart. So literally drawing the pieces of pie that represent, this is how I spend my time. So you kind of see, and you just guess, you think back to last week, okay, I was about this much time in meetings, this much time on creating valuable deliverables or whatever it is. So what happens is then you look at this pie chart that you've drawn and you notice, then I ask the question, okay, now circle those activities which you believe have directly contributed to high value creation, however you define value creation. And people are shocked at how little amount of time they spent last week on actually creating value. And I also have them include their overtime, right? So the first thing I do is I ask too, how many hours a week do you work? Is your full-time pie chart, does 100% equal 60 hours or 40 or 80 or what is it? And then you see why there's overwhelm. And then you begin this dialogue, okay, for my role now, then sometimes you have to go back and ask the question for the role and for the team and maybe for the whole organization, how do we define value creation in other terms other than a dollar sign, right? How do we define it? And then we go to the role design and say, what do you think? How many hours do you think without working overtime you could spend on creating value? And then there's the whole question, what needs to shift? And then you look at all those 5 other elements and say, what needs to shift in order to make this happen, in order to create the conditions for organizational attention to be protected and managed.
That's fascinating. And what are people spending? What do people typically spend more of their time on? Reactive type things?
It's logistical tasks. It's still email, Slack channels, or team, whatever instant messaging you have. A lot of people I work with are in tech, so there's Slack overload and Slack nightmares, and I'm in 99 Slack channels, and I have this. They feel like there's an unwritten policy that I have to respond in these channels, or people will think I'm not there, or people won't think I'm collaborating if I don't show up. So a lot of people are just putting cursory remarks just to show I'm here, but it's not really value added. It's just creating more noise. So that's a big issue. And yes, they're finding that mostly they're spending time on messaging, communications, asynchronous communications. And then, of course, most people say we have too many meetings. We really don't need all of these meetings, or they could be 15 minutes. Yeah, that's the short answer.
I'm going to ask you a random question that probably shouldn't, but do you think that the Big Four model, I mean, when you talked about your sort of shift about 10 years ago to more a holistic approach to this, do you think the Big Four model is outdated?
So I haven't been in it in 10 years, so I can only comment on the day I left, which was 2010. At that time, now I look back and I believe, yes, it is outdated. I also believe the power structure and the hierarchical structure of the way a partnership is crafted is is outdated and not particularly healthy.
Do you think it's healthy for their clients?
No. I also believe that clients are not being served in the best way possible because of the systemic, I mean, it's a system, right? Partnerships are a system, and this probably includes law firms. I'm guessing they're very similar. And when you're part of that system, you know, I'm embarrassed to really share that I have a bit of, I'm not going to say regret. You learn from everything, but you know, when I was in the Central East European firm of PricewaterhouseCoopers, a partner in the Russian practice, but it was a CEE practice. And I moved to Canada. And for the first time, I really become aware of climate change. I become aware of Earth. I become aware of how I was incentivized to work. And I just really had to step back. I was like, oh my gosh. And I never heard the word social impact. Yeah, there was a sustainability practice starting on the sidelines, but compartmentalized. And so I had this realization that my whole life, have I really done any good other than work for some pretty nasty oil firms? Because I'm a Russian speaker. I worked for Russian oil companies. And so I have this thing in me that says, I really need to have some social impact now. I need to do some good in the world because I spent so many years serving, with a unbeknownst to me, really. You know, I thought I was doing well because I was making a lot of money and because I was creating a lot of jobs. I built 2 practices, right? So I thought that's great. Well, honestly, I didn't create any social impact. And that is what I've been sitting with the last 10 years. And that is also how this work has evolved on multiple levels.
I thank you for being vulnerable about that and speaking about that, because I think that's really important that, you know, we all get to that point in our lives, right, where you kind of come to some realizations about who you are and what you want to do. And I think it's actually shows a lot of courage to sort of say, you know what, I've got to go a different direction for me and for my own soul and for my own well-being, right? I think so. I applaud you making that big shift, because I'm sure it would have been tempting to jump right back into it in Canada. And
well, I did for 10 months. I did, and honestly, I didn't leave for the social impact reason. I left because I was just bored. After being in a Russian firm, and you come to Canada and start serving Canadian clients. I mean, that in comparison was just so boring. I was like, no, I'm just going to move to the nonprofit. You know, I left. Yeah. It was out of boredom, and then the realization hit me only after I left the firm. Right.
Sometimes it doesn't matter how we get there. We just get there. We all have a different road to get to that enlightenment or that reason. That's okay. I know the feeling. So what is embodied leadership?
That is one of my favorite questions. So I learned about embodiment, as I said, at MIT's Presencing Institute, because embodiment practices are part of this Theory U transformation or system change work. And embodied leadership is defined in many different ways, but the simplest definition is, as a leader, are we tapping into the knowing that comes from the brain that's in our gut? The knowing that comes from the body, and not just our own individual bodies. Are we doing wisdom practice? And that could be being in nature, that could be meditation. Are we doing any sort of reflective practice? Because most reflective practices get us back in the body and out of our heads, right? And so embodied leadership is also, I would expand it now more to the Theory U definition, which I call a body wisdom work, but the actual term is social presencing. And social presencing, and it's called social presencing theater. I drop the word theater when I talk about it because it is not acting. Theater in this case means a place we create conditions to see something or let something arise, like on a stage, that we wouldn't have seen before. And so social presencing is an innovation technique to tap into collective wisdom to complement the data and the intelligence and the dialogue that we are using in our innovative practices. So what we do in social presencing is we facilitate a group, for example, that chooses a particular challenge to work on, a common challenge that they're working on, and we model the felt sense of that challenge in the body. And people assume the embodiment of a role in the system. So you may have a stakeholder in that system called government, a stakeholder called client, a stakeholder called whatever the team decides the stakeholders should be in what's called this 4D mapping exercise. And then people embody the sense of the challenge that they're working on. They ask themselves, where do I feel this stuckness of this challenge in my body? Do I feel it in my gut? Do I feel it in my head? And then sculptures arise around amplifying the sensation in the body so that a shape arises in the individual and then also in the social body. So we're sensing into the collective shape of the team, the visible shape of the team, right? You and I right now are in a duet.
Okay.
We're two faces on a screen, and we can see each other. We can see our faces. We can see the boxes. So that is our social body right now. It's a duet. We're also in a larger social body. Actually, we're in a huge social body that is also unseen because this is streaming on multiple platforms. So think about all of the people looking at us as one social body. And what is the energy of that body? Well, we can't see it, so we can't really do this social presencing exercise, but we can, in a sense, we can sense into, especially you, because you know your audience, you can sense into, also based on comments that come in or questions, what is the dynamic? It's like feeling the room, right? What is the dynamic of this particular social body right now? And what is the data from that helps us do our work? So I don't know if that was a good summary. It's literally, it's so hard to describe this work without seeing a video of it, but that is my best attempt right now in answering that question.
Oh, no, that's fine, and I mean that's fine. Can you send me a video that we can post, or when you in the show after the show's posted on LinkedIn today? If you can put a video in there, I mean that would be great, because I think I'd love for people to be able to dig into that more and get a better context, right? I understand it's hard to do in this sort of on this forum or this platform.
Absolutely, I can do that, Rhett. And the thing that I would describe here, and when I teach teams these days, since COVID started, I'm teaching teams a simple method on how to develop interconnectedness. And we simply notice that we're in relationship with 6 things all the time. So we're in relationship with Earth through gravitational pull, right? That's number 1. So what's our relationship? Where are my feet on the ground here in Toronto? Can I feel my feet? The second relationship is with our own bodies. Can I feel myself sitting? How do I feel today physically? The third one, I already mentioned, the social body, that we're sharing a container. And here a container is Zoom, or a container is a subway car, right? We're always in social bodies. Right. Then there's and the social body is visible. Then there's the invisible social field, which is the network of relationships. You know, you and I just met, but we have history in a way because we both spent time in Central Asia. So the fabric of our social field is maybe a little bit closer on a first time meeting because we had that shared experience, albeit separately, but so that's the social field. And then we have 2 spaces now that we're always in. We're in a virtual space, and of course we're always in a physical space. And what is our relationship to space? So that sensing fosters interconnectedness between humans in a virtual world and in any world, but in particular now in a virtual world.
How do you get teams to understand this?
Experience. Okay. This practice has to be, I even hesitate talking about it on podcasts because it is so hard to describe. So it can only be experienced. Okay. So I simply encourage people to try new things. And sometimes that's just starting with, maybe Lego serious play or the empathy toy or the failure toy. So simpler, less kind of out there practices that are because social presencing is a vulnerable practice. It's quite scary because you're very vulnerable. You're showing shapes of yourself to other people. So depending on where a team is, I will recommend different embodied practices that range from simple gameplay to social presencing.
Yeah, it seems like there's a step to get people to that vulnerability. I mean, that's why I was asking that, because it's a big jump to just go from zero to so yeah, I was wondering how you sort of bridge that gap and to get people to that space where they could do this really and be open to it and be that vulnerable.
Yeah, the other way I bridge it is by not talking about it, but by introducing some simple concepts also throughout the first couple of modules of this Focus Better journey, right? Through when we talk about focus and when we talk about culture, I will insert some principles and some learnings that introduce this without it being scary.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. I figured there was some way that you did that. How do you? One of the things I want to we sort of touched on this earlier about getting out of tech and back in your body. Can you go into that a little bit?
So one simple example is that in March, I hosted the first Canadian National Day of Unplugging. Okay. And the National Day of Unplugging has been going on in the United States for about 10 years. And this is a movement to get people to step one. Can I unplug for 24 hours continuously from 6 p.m. on a Friday night to 6 p.m. on a Saturday? Can I fully unplug from everything, from telephone, from maybe I need a landline for an emergency, but from unplugging from the smartphone, unplugging from television, and unplugging from absolutely any screen. And then exploring, well, what do I want to do with that time? Okay, 8 hours of that time is probably sleeping. So that cuts into it, but you still got 16 hours left. What am I going to do unplugged? So there's this movement afoot, and we had a group, of course, in Canada, and we gathered and ceremoniously unplugged together on the Friday night, and for an hour before unplugging, those shared all of our strategies for what we were going to do. And people were so looking forward to this because they had planned, and I wrote some posts about this, and the National Day of Unplugging had many ideas, and there's a handbook of how to unplug in Canada anyway, what to do outside, what books are we going to read, who are we maybe going to talk to on a landline, because there's nothing wrong with talking to someone on a landline. It doesn't cause liking and addiction and looking at a screen. Right. And can I eat a mindful meal? Can I have dinner without a phone or a TV? So just starting that conversation, to me, that's the simplest thing. And then, when you're ready, the Center for Humane Technology, who I follow and certainly admire all of the work that they do, recommends unplugging 24 hours a week. So right now, what I'm encouraging people to do is try this once a month. Especially if you participated in the National Day of Unplugging, try it once a month and then work up to once a week. And then maybe, you do it for 3 days at a time, or maybe you take a device-free vacation, right? You're involved in a nonprofit around outdoor learning.
Yeah.
And so I also piloted the first device-free travel experience in 2019. And created a travel experience about how do we find the conditions for awe to arise. And this was in Armenia, another former Soviet republic, right? So I still can't get away from the region. My daughter lives in Armenia. Huh. So we created this prototype. And I have to say, though, it failed to an extent, because the 10 people that I brought with me on this first prototype, although they agreed in advance, yes, this is great, Michelle, device-free vacation, let's be device-free. We have a videographer, we have a photographer, we don't need to be taking pictures. Well, on day one, it just flew out the window. So I let go of that, but that experience really, I think, is actually what gave rise ultimately to these Focus Better journeys, because I was the only person who was device-free on this trip, and I became an observer. And I just observed for 10 days, and I was fascinated. I was just fascinated by the relationship between the human and the machine. And then when I came back to Canada, I began to observe the tech company that I was primarily involved in at the time. And this is what really informed, and then COVID hit a year later, right? So I had already been doing this keen observation based on this experience. And I was just fascinated more than anything else. And of course, I think we do strive to do things that we most have to learn ourselves. So observing my own self in this difficult relationship with machines also continues to be a big part of it.
Well, we need to talk about this device-free vacation, because we actually at the Outdoor Leadership Institute, we've been talking about this a lot. And we go to places where the cell phones don't work. We're so far out and away from civilization that you just don't get a cell signal, and the only means of communication is a sat phone. But I think what we need to talk about that, because maybe we could do something together on this, because I think that there is a desire for it. It's but boy, is it hard to do. I can imagine. I mean, it makes me sweat thinking about giving it up for a weekend, but I kind of dig it. I kind of like the idea, because we are so married to these devices and so married to, and I can't imagine how much time we all waste. Imagine how much more productive I would be if I didn't look at social media at all. It'd be way more productive. Well, I mean, this has really been fascinating, and there's so much more to talk about. I mean, we didn't even get into strategies, and we didn't get into a lot of what I would love to talk about, but we are out of time. So that just means I have to have you back, if that's okay.
That'd be lovely. I have one tip for people.
Please,
yes. I have a free tool now on my website. If you want to do a quick, less than 5-minute assessment of your ability to harness attention, just go to MindEquity.ca. That's CA for Canada. So MindEquity.ca, and you'll see a green button pretty much on every page that just says score your focus. And so it's a mini assessment tool. It will score you in these 5 areas that impact your attention, and you'll get an idea of what your current state is.
Well, thank you. That would be great. I highly recommend for you to take it. And is that something that everybody on your team could take?
Anybody can take it. Anybody with access to the internet who can go to my website can take it. Yeah.
Is there a way for a leader to take a look at that data and it helps them?
So what I offer to leaders is after you've taken the assessment, if you take it on your own and if it's of interest, just reach out to me, because I do offer a free attention audit. So I do a 50-question questionnaire or survey that your team can take, and I provide you with the collective team results. No individual results, those are kept confidential. I provide the collective team results of any team that wants to do that 50-question survey, and I give a little interactive talk to the leader or to the team so that they can begin on this journey.
It sounds like that's something I would like to be certified in. Do you have a certification program?
Not yet. That may be down the road, but we're in early stages with this service line. So, welcome.
Okay. Well, something to think about, maybe. All right. Well, thank you, Michelle. This has been fascinating. We're going to have to have you back to talk more about this, because you've sort of blown my mind today, and I've got a lot to think about now. So anyway, thank you for spending some time with us here today on Power Lunch Live. We've got a jam-packed month. We've been a little slack the last couple of months, but it's been a busy couple of months. Tomorrow we've got Meredith Bell. Next week, James Sinclair, Keziah Robinson, and Megan Lynch. So we've got a busy couple of weeks, and thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. Thanks.
Thank you, Rhett. Bye-bye.